When a single father discovers a CEO's darkest secret, he has 48 hours to save her empire or watch everything collapse. This isn't just a construction job. This isn't just another inspection. What Lucas Hale found beneath that coastal property will shake you to your core, a conspiracy so deep it threatens to destroy not just buildings, but lives. Stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels across the world. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The ocean never lied. That's what Lucas Hale's father used to tell him, back when the old man still had steady hands and clear eyes, before the Parkinsons took both. The ocean showed you exactly what it was: brutal, honest, unforgiving. No pretense, no politics, just raw truth crashing against the shore, over and over, until even the strongest rocks surrendered to its persistence. Lucas thought about that now as he guided his Ford F-250 down the winding coastal highway, the Pacific stretching endlessly to his right, gray and churning under a November sky that couldn't decide between rain and something worse. The truck's suspension groaned over a pothole the county had been promising to fix for 3 years. Empty promises. He'd stopped believing in those around the same time he'd stopped believing his ex-wife would come back. She hadn't, but Emma had stayed, his daughter, 7 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with drawing unicorns that looked more like dogs with ice cream cones glued to their heads. One of those drawings was tucked into the dashboard right now, held in place by the sun visor, the crayon marks already fading but still bright enough to matter. "Daddy and Me at the Beach," she'd titled it in wobbly letters. In the picture, they were holding hands. Both of them were smiling. The sun was a perfect yellow circle, because in Emma's world, the sun was always perfect and yellow, and fathers never left, and mothers always came home. Lucas pushed the thought away and focused on the road. The job site was another 15 minutes north, perched on a bluff overlooking Monterey Bay. He'd taken the contract 3 days ago, a structural inspection for Kane Properties, some corporate entity he'd never heard of, owned by some CEO he'd never met. The property manager had been vague on the phone, which usually meant one of two things. Either the damage was worse than they wanted to admit, or they were hoping he'd lowball the estimate so they could flip the place fast. Lucas didn't play those games. He assessed. He quoted. He walked away if the numbers didn't work. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, back when he still thought being nice meant saying yes to everyone, back when he thought people would return the favor. They didn't. The highway curved inland, trading ocean views for dense clusters of cypress trees bent sideways by decades of coastal wind. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text from his sister, Marnie, probably asking if he'd picked up Emma's science project poster board. He'd forgotten. Again. He made a mental note to swing by the craft store on the way home, then immediately forgot the mental note because his brain was already 3 steps ahead, running calculations on rebar tensile strength and foundation load distribution, the language he spoke more fluently than English these days. The GPS chimed. In 500 feet, turn right onto Cypress Ridge Road. Lucas slowed, scanning for the turn. The road wasn't marked, typical for these old coastal properties, where rich people liked their privacy and hated their neighbors. He spotted a narrow gravel drive cutting between 2 stone pillars, each one topped with a rusted iron lantern that probably hadn't worked since the Carter administration. He turned in. The drive wound upward through the cypress grove, branches scraping against the truck's sides like skeletal fingers. The trees opened suddenly into a clearing, and Lucas got his first look at the property. His foot eased off the gas. The house, if you could call it that, was a sprawling 2-story structure that seemed to grow organically from the bluff itself. All weathered cedar shingles and wide wraparound porches, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean. Architectural Digest material, or it had been once. Now it wore its age badly, peeling paint, sagging gutters, a stone chimney with visible cracks running down its face like varicose veins. But it was the foundation that made Lucas's stomach tighten. The entire western corner of the house tilted noticeably downward, like a ship taking on water. The porch on that side had pulled away from the main structure, leaving a gap wide enough to see clear through to the crawl space beneath. Support beams bowed under weight they were never meant to carry, and the ground itself looked wrong, disturbed, recently excavated and poorly refilled, the earth darker than the surrounding soil. Someone had been digging. Someone had been digging, and then someone had stopped, and then someone had called him. Lucas parked near the front entrance and killed the engine. For a moment, he just sat there, studying the damage through the windshield, his contractor's instincts already cataloging problems. Soil erosion, compromised load-bearing walls, possible water intrusion, probable foundation failure. This wasn't a repair job. This was a teardown waiting to happen, which made him wonder, why hire an inspector? Why not just condemn the place and start over? He grabbed his clipboard and tool bag from the passenger seat, then paused, glancing at Emma's drawing one more time. In the picture, they were both smiling. He wanted to keep it that way. That meant taking jobs that paid, not jobs that dragged him into someone else's corporate nightmare. He should leave. Right now. Text the property manager. Tell them the damage was too extensive. Recommend they hire a demolition crew instead. But Lucas had driven an hour to get here, and Emma needed new shoes, and the orthodontist wanted a deposit for the braces she'd need in 2 years, and the truck's transmission was making a sound that promised expensive problems in the near future. So he got out. The wind hit him immediately, cold, sharp, carrying the smell of salt and decay. He pulled his jacket tighter and headed for the entrance, boots crunching on gravel that needed fresh spreading. The front door was solid mahogany, hand-carved with some kind of nautical design, the kind of craftsmanship you didn't see anymore because nobody wanted to pay for it. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time, and heard movement inside. Footsteps, quick and light, approaching fast. The door opened. Lucas had seen the photos in the business section of the San Francisco Chronicle, the ones they ran whenever Kane Properties closed another deal or opened another development. Victoria Kane, CEO and founder, 38 years old. Stanford MBA. Forbes. 30 under 30. Back when she was still 29. In those photos, she was always impeccably composed, tailored suits, sharp angles, the kind of confidence that made investors open their checkbooks and competitors close their offices. The woman standing in front of him now looked nothing like those photos. She was tall, taller than him by an inch, maybe two, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail so tight it looked painful. She wore what might have once been an expensive silk blouse, now wrinkled and untucked over black slacks that had visible coffee stains near the knee. No makeup, no jewelry except for a plain silver watch. And her eyes were exhausted, not tired, exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that came from fighting too long against too many enemies, the kind that settled into your bones and refused to leave no matter how much you slept. "You're the inspector," she said. Not a question. "Lucas Hale." He offered his hand. She looked at it for a moment as if deciding whether human contact was worth the effort, then shook it briefly. Her grip was firm but trembling slightly, like a wire pulled too tight. "Victoria Kane." She stepped back, gesturing him inside. "I assume you've already assessed the exterior damage. Enough to know this isn't a minor repair." "Nothing about this is minor." She closed the door behind him, then leaned against it, arms crossed, defensive. "How long will the inspection take?" "Depends on what I find. Couple hours minimum." "You have 90 minutes. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Foundation inspections aren't something you rush." 90 minutes, she repeated, harder this time. "After that, I have a conference call with the board, and they're going to ask me if this property is salvageable or if we should cut our losses and demolish. I need an answer before that call." "Then you need a different inspector." He turned toward the door. "Wait." Lucas stopped but didn't turn around. He heard her exhale, slow and controlled, the sound of someone forcing themselves to de-escalate. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, stripped of the corporate armor. "I'm sorry, that was—" She trailed off, searching for the word. "Inappropriate. You drove all the way up here, and I'm being—" Another pause. "Please? Just do your job. Take whatever time you need." Lucas turned back. She was still leaning against the door, but the defensive posture had cracked slightly. She looked smaller somehow, despite her height, vulnerable in a way that didn't match the headlines. "Why are you here?" he asked. "I own the property." "No. Why are you here?" CEOs don't show up to structural inspections. They send property managers, assistants, people whose time is less valuable. Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe that someone had actually called her on it. "You want the truth?" She pushed off from the door, walking deeper into the house without waiting for his answer. This property is the last piece of real estate my company owns that isn't leveraged to the hilt. Everything else, every development, every commercial building, every square inch of dirt from here to Sacramento, it's all collateral. All tied up in loans and partnerships and deals that made sense 5 years ago, but are strangling me now. She stopped in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the ocean. The weak afternoon light caught the tension in her shoulders, the rigid line of her spine. This place? She gestured vaguely at the room around them. This was supposed to be my safety net, the thing I could sell if everything went to hell, except someone's been sabotaging it. Lucas set down his tool bag. Sabotaging how? The foundation damage. It's new. 3 months ago, this house was solid. I had it inspected before I refinanced the company's debt. Clean report, no issues. Then suddenly, the western corner starts sinking. Support beams crack. The porch pulls away. And conveniently, right before I need to liquidate assets, I get a letter from the county saying the structure is unsafe and needs to be condemned. Who sent the letter? County Building Department. Signed by the chief inspector. She finally turned to face him. Who happens to be the brother-in-law of Richard Morse? The name meant nothing to Lucas. Morse owns half the commercial real estate in Monterey County, Victoria continued. He's been trying to buy this property for 2 years. I keep saying no. So now he's forcing my hand, make the place uninhabitable, tank its value, swoop in with a lowball offer when I'm desperate. Lucas studied her carefully. In his experience, there were 2 kinds of people who believed in conspiracies, the paranoid and the perceptive. The paranoid saw enemies everywhere. The perceptive saw patterns that others missed. He wasn't sure which category Victoria Kane fell into yet. If all that's true, he said slowly, why hire me? Why not bring in your own engineers, fight the county's assessment? Because I'm out of time. She crossed to a desk in the corner, grabbed a folder, and handed it to him. That's the county's report. They're giving me 30 days to either repair the structure or demolish it. After that, they'll do it for me and bill me for the cost. Lucas flipped open the folder. The county's assessment was thorough but vague. Lots of technical language about compromised structural integrity and imminent collapse risk without specific measurements or engineering data to back it up. Sloppy work or deliberately misleading. And you think I'll find something different? I think you'll find the truth. Victoria's voice was steady now, certain. I did my research, Mr. Hale. You don't cut corners, you don't play politics. You assess properties the way they are, not the way people want them to be. That's why I called you. Lucas closed the folder and handed it back. And if the truth is that the county's right, if this place really is about to collapse? For the first time since he'd arrived, Victoria Kane smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd already lost everything and was just waiting for the paperwork to make it official. Then I'll demolish it myself, she said quietly. At least that way Morse doesn't win. Lucas picked up his tool bag and headed for the door leading to the crawl space. I'll start underneath, work my way up. Mr. Hale? He paused. Stop being nice, Victoria said, her voice tight again. It makes this harder. Lucas didn't respond. He just opened the door and descended into the darkness beneath the house, leaving Victoria Kane alone with her ocean view and her collapsing empire. The crawlspace smelled like every crawlspace Lucas had ever worked in. Damp earth, rotting wood, and the faint metallic tang of rust from old pipes. He clicked on his headlamp and crouched low, duck-walking between the foundation piers, his clipboard tucked under one arm. The damage was immediately obvious. 3 of the main support beams showed fresh cracks. The wood splintered along the grain in patterns that suggested sudden stress rather than gradual deterioration. The foundation piers themselves, concrete columns sunk deep into the earth, were intact, but the soil around them had been disturbed. Recently, he could see the layers, darker earth on top, lighter clay beneath, the boundary between them too sharp to be natural settling. Someone had dug here, excavated the soil around the piers, probably trying to undermine the foundation's stability. But they'd stopped. That was the strange part. If you were going to sabotage a foundation, you didn't stop halfway. You kept digging until the whole thing came down. These excavations were shallow, almost tentative, as if whoever did it either lost their nerve or got interrupted. Lucas moved deeper under the house, testing each beam, documenting the damage with photos and measurements. His hands moved automatically, years of experience guiding him through the familiar ritual of assessment. But his mind was working on a different problem. Victoria Kane's story made sense on the surface. Powerful developer wants her property, creates artificial problems to force a sale. Classic strong-arm tactics. Lucas had seen it before in smaller markets, local bullies pushing out mom-and-pop businesses. But something felt off. If Richard Morse had the county inspector in his pocket, why bother with the sabotage? Why not just fabricate the whole report, claim the foundation was compromised without actually damaging anything? Cleaner, less risk, less evidence. Unless the sabotage wasn't about the foundation at all, unless someone wanted Victoria Kane to find the damage, to know she was being targeted. Lucas paused, his headlamp beam catching something wedged between a floor joist and a pipe bracket. He reached up carefully and pulled it free. It was a work glove. Heavy-duty leather, well-worn, but not old. The kind contractors wore. The kind he wore. He turned it over in his hands, examining it under the light. No identifying marks. No company logo. But the palm was stained with fresh soil, the same dark earth from the excavated areas. Someone had been down here. Recently. Digging. And they'd left evidence behind. Careless or intentional? Lucas pocketed the glove and continued his inspection, moving systematically through the crawl space until he'd documented every crack, every displacement, every sign of tampering. When he finally emerged 90 minutes later, squinting against the daylight, he found Victoria exactly where he'd left her, standing at the windows, staring at the ocean. She didn't turn around. Well? Lucas brushed dirt off his jeans and set down his tool bag. The damage is real. 3 load-bearing beams are compromised. The foundation piers are sound, but someone's been excavating around them, destabilizing the soil. Morse. Maybe. Lucas pulled out the glove and tossed it onto the desk. Found that under the house, fresh soil on it. Whoever's doing the digging isn't professional. A real saboteur wouldn't leave evidence. Victoria finally turned, her eyes focusing on the glove with an intensity that made Lucas take a step back. What does that mean? It means either you're dealing with an amateur or someone wants you to think you're dealing with an amateur. That's not an answer. No, Lucas agreed. It's not. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the only sound the wind rattling the windows and the distant crash of waves against the bluff. Victoria's expression cycled through several emotions too quickly for Lucas to catalog: anger, fear, calculation, resignation. Can you fix it? She finally asked. The beams? Yes. I'd need to sister new supports alongside the damaged ones, reinforce the connection points, stabilize the soil around the piers. 2 weeks' work? Maybe 3. Call it $30,000 for materials and labor. And then the property would pass inspection? If I do it right, yes. Victoria crossed to the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a checkbook. I'll pay you double. $60,000, but I need it done in 1 week. Lucas shook his head. Structural work can't be rushed. You try to compress the timeline, you compromise the integrity. I don't have 2 weeks, Mr. Hale. She clicked her pen, the sound sharp in the quiet room. In 2 weeks, the county's deadline expires. Morse will have his opening, and I'll have nothing. Then sell the property now, before it gets condemned. You'll take a hit, but no. The word came out flat, absolute. Victoria set down the pen and looked at him directly, and Lucas saw something in her eyes he hadn't noticed before. Not exhaustion, not fear, but something harder. Something that had been tempered by heat and pressure until it either became diamond or shattered completely. This property belonged to my mother, she said quietly. She bought it 30 years ago with money she saved working double shifts as a nurse. Every penny, every sacrifice. This was going to be her retirement home, the place she'd finally rest after spending her whole life taking care of other people. Victoria's voice didn't waver, but Lucas saw her hands tighten on the edge of the desk. She died before she could move in. Cancer. Fast and ugly. And I promised her... She stopped, swallowed hard. I promised I'd keep it, that I wouldn't let some corporate shark turn it into another vacation rental or boutique hotel. That it would stay hers. Lucas understood now. This wasn't about money or property values or corporate strategy. This was personal. This was about a promise made to a dying woman, the kind of promise that didn't bend no matter how much pressure you applied. The kind of promise Lucas had made to Emma, standing in the hospital parking lot the day her mother left. I'll never leave you, not ever, I promise. He'd kept that promise, so far. I can't do it in a week, he said, but I can do it in 10 days if I work 16-hour shifts and call in some favors for materials delivery. Victoria wrote the check without hesitation, her handwriting surprisingly delicate for someone who bulldozed through corporate boardrooms. She tore it out and held it toward him, but when Lucas reached for it, she didn't let go. Mr. Hale, I need you to understand something. Her voice was steady but low, almost intimate. The people trying to take this from me, they don't play fair. They don't follow rules. And they will absolutely come after you if they think you're in their way. I'm a contractor, not a soldier. So am I, but that didn't stop them. Lucas gently pulled the check free from her grip. I'll start tomorrow, early, before sunrise. Why? Because foundations are easier to read in the morning light, before the heat distorts everything. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. Victoria nodded, her professional mask sliding back into place like armor. I'll be here. You don't need to be. I know. Lucas gathered his tools and headed for the door, but paused with his hand on the carved mahogany. Ms. Kane, for what it's worth, I don't think Morse is your problem. She turned sharply. What do you mean? I mean, someone's going to a lot of trouble to make you think he's your problem, which makes me wonder what you're not paying attention to while you're focused on him. He left before she could respond, stepping back out into the coastal wind, which had picked up while he'd been inside. The drive back down through the cypress trees felt longer than the drive up, the twisted branches reaching for his truck like they wanted to pull him back. Lucas didn't look in the rearview mirror. He had 10 days to repair a foundation that someone was actively trying to destroy. 10 days to honor a dead woman's wish and maybe, help a living woman keep the last thing that mattered to her. 10 days before Richard Morse or whoever was really pulling the strings made their next move. The ocean never lied, his father used to say. But people? People lied all the time. Lucas just had to figure out who was lying and why before the whole thing came crashing down. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text from Emma. Did you get my poster board yet? Lucas swore quietly and took the next exit toward town, toward the craft store he'd already forgotten twice, toward the normal life he was trying so hard to protect. The check in his pocket felt heavier than it should. $60,000. Double the job's worth. Nobody paid double unless they were desperate, or unless they were buying more than just construction work. Lucas didn't know which one Victoria Kane was doing, but as he pulled into the parking lot of Michael's Arts and Crafts, watching elementary school kids and their frazzled parents stream in and out with bags of glitter and foam board, he made a decision. He'd fix the foundation. He'd keep his promise. And if someone tried to stop him, well, Lucas Hale had been through worse. He'd lost his wife, his savings, and his faith in people who made promises they didn't keep. But he'd never walked away from a job half-finished. He wasn't about to start now. Emma was asleep when he got home, her unicorn nightlight casting pink shadows across her face. Lucas set the poster board gently against her desk, 3 different sizes because he hadn't known which one she needed, and stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her breathe. 7 years old, first grade, learning to read chapter books and tie her shoes and navigate a world that had already taught her that mothers sometimes left and fathers sometimes forgot poster board. But not tonight. Tonight, he'd remembered. Tomorrow, he'd start fixing Victoria Kane's foundation. But tonight, he'd done the more important work. Being the kind of father Emma's drawing showed him as. Smiling, present, holding her hand. Lucas closed her door quietly and walked to his own bedroom, where his laptop waited on the nightstand. He opened it, typed Richard Morse Monterey into the search bar, and started reading. 3 hours later, when his eyes burned and his coffee had gone cold, he'd learned several things. Richard Morse was exactly who Victoria said he was. Powerful, connected, ruthless in business dealings. He'd built his empire through strategic acquisitions, mostly buying distressed properties at below-market prices and flipping them for massive profits. He had no criminal record, no obvious scandals, no public feuds except the usual corporate competition. He was also broke, or close to it. Lucas had found a bankruptcy filing from 8 months ago, quickly withdrawn but still visible in the public records. Morse's development company was drowning in debt, over-leveraged on projects that had stalled during the pandemic and never recovered. A man that desperate didn't waste time on elaborate sabotage schemes. He just made offers people couldn't refuse. So why hadn't he made Victoria that offer? Lucas closed the laptop and lay back against his pillows, staring at the ceiling. His contractor's brain wanted clear answers. Load calculations, material specs, definite solutions to definite problems. But the part of him that had learned to read people, the part that had watched his wife's eyes go distant months before she actually left, the part that could tell when a client was lying about their budget or their timeline, that part was screaming that something didn't add up. The sabotage was too obvious. The county inspector's involvement was too convenient. The glove left behind was too careless. And Victoria Kane's exhaustion felt too specific, too targeted, like someone who wasn't just fighting business battles, but fighting something more personal, someone who was being hunted, not just outmaneuvered. Lucas's phone lit up on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. Don't show up tomorrow. You're being warned once. He stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it and set the phone face down. Someone was watching. Someone knew he'd taken the job, and someone was scared enough of him doing it that they'd reached out within hours of his inspection. Lucas smiled grimly in the darkness. Good. If they were scared, it meant Victoria was right. It meant the foundation mattered more than just structural integrity. It meant there was something worth protecting. And Lucas Hale, single father, contractor, man who fixed things because life had broken enough, was very good at protecting what mattered. He set his alarm for 4 a.m., closed his eyes, and tried not to think about the fact that he'd just made himself a target. Tried not to think about Emma sleeping down the hall, dreaming about unicorns and beaches and fathers who never left. Tried not to think about the ocean, brutal and honest, crashing against the bluff where Victoria Kane's last stand waited. The ocean never lied. But tomorrow, Lucas would have to face the people who did, and hope his tools were sharp enough for whatever he found beneath the surface. The alarm didn't wake Lucas because he'd never actually fallen asleep. He'd lain there in the darkness, listening to the house settle around him, thinking about threatening text messages and work gloves left in crawl spaces, and a woman who looked like she'd been fighting a war nobody else could see. By the time 4 a.m. rolled around, he was already dressed, coffee brewing in the kitchen, his tool bag waiting by the door like a loyal dog. He checked on Emma one last time before leaving. She'd kicked off her blankets again, sprawled diagonally across her bed with one arm hanging off the edge. Her stuffed elephant clutched against her chest. Lucas pulled the blankets back up to her shoulders, careful not to wake her, and left a note on the kitchen counter for Marnie, who'd be arriving at 6 to get Emma ready for school. Gone early. Back by dinner. Love you both. Simple. Honest. The kind of note that didn't mention threatening texts or corporate conspiracies, or the fact that he was about to spend the next 10 days working alone on an isolated property where someone had already proven they were willing to play dirty. The drive up the coastal highway was different in the pre-dawn darkness. No ocean views, just the suggestion of vast emptiness to his right, marked by the rhythmic crash of invisible waves. The truck's headlights carved a tunnel through the blackness, catching occasional glimpses of cypress branches reaching across the road like gnarled fingers. Lucas kept checking his rearview mirror, looking for following headlights that never appeared. Maybe the text had been a bluff. Maybe whoever sent it didn't actually care enough to follow through. Maybe... The thought died as he turned onto Cypress Ridge Road and saw the glow. Not headlights. Something else. Something orange and flickering, visible through the trees ahead. Fire. Lucas's foot hit the accelerator, the truck engine roaring as he tore up the gravel drive, branches scraping paint he couldn't afford to fix. The trees opened into the clearing and his headlights swept across a scene that made his breath catch. The house wasn't burning, but the crawl space was. Flames licked out from beneath the western corner, the same area where he'd found the excavated soil and the compromised beams. Smoke billowed upward, catching in the porch overhang, and in the strobing orange light, Lucas could see a figure standing near the foundation, silhouetted against the flames, holding what looked like a gas can. The figure turned at the sound of the truck, and for one crystalline moment, Lucas saw him clearly. Late 20s, baseball cap pulled low, work jacket identical to the kind contractors wore, the kind Lucas wore. Their eyes met across 30 feet of firelit ground. Then the figure dropped the gas can and ran. Lucas slammed the truck into park and jumped out, but he wasn't chasing the arsonist. He was running toward the house, toward the flames that were already spreading along the dry wood of the floor joists, racing toward the main structure like a fuse burning toward dynamite. Victoria! He didn't know if she was inside, didn't know if she'd stayed overnight or gone home to wherever home was. But the house had lights on in the upper windows, and that was enough. Lucas grabbed the fire extinguisher from his truck bed, required equipment on every job site, though he'd never actually needed it until now, and dove into the crawl space, into heat and smoke that immediately made his eyes water and his lungs seize. The flames had already consumed 2 of the damaged support beams, the wood crackling and splitting as fire ate through structural integrity that was already compromised. Lucas aimed the extinguisher and pulled the trigger, white foam spraying across the burning wood, smothering flames but also obscuring his vision in a cloud of chemical smoke. He couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't tell if he was making progress or just dying more slowly. Then hands grabbed his jacket from behind and yanked him backward, out of the crawl space, into cold air that felt like salvation. Lucas collapsed onto the gravel, coughing so hard he thought his lungs might turn inside out. Someone was kneeling beside him, a hand on his back, a voice cutting through the roaring in his ears. Breathe, slowly, in through your nose. Victoria. Lucas forced his eyes open and found her crouched next to him, wearing the same wrinkled clothes from yesterday, her face smudged with ash. She had a fire extinguisher in her other hand, already empty, white foam dripping from the nozzle. There's another one, she said, remarkably calm for someone whose property was actively burning. In my car. Trunk. Lucas tried to stand, but his legs weren't cooperating. Victoria was already moving, running to a black Mercedes sedan parked near the house's eastern side, popping the trunk, pulling out a second extinguisher. She didn't wait for him. She went back into the crawl space alone. Lucas forced himself to his feet, grabbed his extinguisher, still half full, and followed her into the smoke. They worked in tandem without speaking, each taking a different section of the burning support structure, spraying foam until both extinguishers ran dry and the flames finally, reluctantly, died. The crawlspace filled with acrid chemical smoke, worse than the fire smoke, and they both staggered out coughing and gasping. This time they collapsed together, sitting side by side on the gravel, breathing hard, staring at the house that had almost burned down around them. You were here, Lucas managed between coughs. You stayed. I couldn't sleep. Victoria's voice was hoarse from smoke. I kept thinking about what you said, about Morse maybe not being the problem. So you spent the night in your car? In the house? On the couch? I brought files, spreadsheets. Everything I could find about the property's history, the deals Morse has made, the county inspector's record. She coughed, wiped ash from her face. I was trying to find the pattern you saw, the thing I was missing. Did you? No, but apparently someone didn't want me to keep looking. Lucas turned to look at her properly. In the weak light starting to creep over the eastern horizon, Victoria Kane looked like a soldier after a long battle. Exhausted, filthy, but still standing. Still fighting. They texted me last night, Lucas said, warned me not to show up. Victoria's head snapped toward him. And you came anyway. I don't respond well to threats. Clearly. Something that might have been respect flickered across her face. Then it hardened into something else. Anger. They're escalating. First the sabotage, then the county report, now arson. They're not trying to buy me out anymore. They're trying to burn me out. Or burn you. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Victoria stood slowly, testing her balance, then walked to where the arsonist had dropped the gas can. She picked it up carefully, examining it in the growing dawn light. No labels, she said, no identifying marks, generic hardware store purchase. Probably paid cash. You sound like a detective. I sound like someone who's been targeted before. She set the can down and pulled out her phone. I'm calling the fire department and the police. They won't do anything. I know, but I need the documentation, the paper trail. She started dialing, then paused. Mr. Hale, you should leave. Before they get here. Before whoever did this sees you as a witness worth silencing. Lucas looked at the house, at the smoke still drifting from the crawl space, at the foundation he'd promised to fix. Then he looked at Victoria, at the woman who'd spent the night on a couch studying spreadsheets because she couldn't let go of a promise made to her dying mother. "I'm not leaving. This isn't your fight. I took your money. That makes it my fight. I'll void the check. Right now. No hard feelings. Just go home to your daughter and pretend you never came here." The mention of Emma hit harder than it should have. Lucas thought about her sleeping peacefully in her unicorn-lit room, dreaming innocent dreams, trusting that her father would always come home, trusting that promises meant something. "Can't," he said simply. "Already cashed it. Mentally spent half on Emma's braces fund." Victoria stared at him for a long moment, and Lucas saw something shift in her expression. The corporate armor cracked a little wider, revealing something raw underneath. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why risk this for a stranger?" Lucas didn't have a good answer, or rather, he had too many answers, none of them simple enough to explain standing in front of a house someone had just tried to burn down, making a choice that any sensible person would call stupid. But he tried. "My ex-wife left 3 years ago," he said. "Didn't give a reason. Just packed her things one day while Emma was at school and disappeared. No note, no explanation, just gone." Victoria waited, not interrupting. "For months I tried to figure out what I'd done wrong, what I could have fixed, what signs I'd missed. And then one day I realized it wasn't about me. She'd just stopped believing in promises, stopped believing that staying was worth the effort of fighting through the hard parts." Lucas picked up his empty fire extinguisher, tested its weight. "I promised Emma I'd never do that, never stop fighting, never walk away just because things got difficult. And maybe that's stupid. Maybe that's why my business barely breaks even, and I drive a truck that's one transmission failure away from death. But I don't know how to be any other way." He met Victoria's eyes directly. "You made a promise to your mother. You're keeping it. I respect that. So no, I'm not leaving. Not because I'm brave or noble or any of that nonsense. Just because I don't know how to quit once I've said I'll do something." For a moment, Victoria just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she did something Lucas hadn't seen her do before. She smiled, really smiled. "You're either the most stubborn man I've ever met," she said, "or the most honest. Probably both." The smile faded, but something warmer replaced it. Respect, maybe. Or recognition, the kind that came from meeting someone who fought the same battles, just in different arenas. "The fire department will be here in 20 minutes, Victoria said, pocketing her phone. "Police in 30. While we wait, let's see how bad the damage is." They returned to the crawl space together, this time armed with flashlights instead of fire extinguishers. The foam had done its job, smothering the flames before they could spread beyond the initial target area. But the two compromised beams were now completely destroyed, reduced to charred wreckage that would need full replacement. Lucas photographed everything with his phone, documenting the burn patterns, the foam residue, the gas can's position. Evidence that probably wouldn't matter in any official investigation, but might matter in whatever unofficial war Victoria was fighting. "This was targeted," he said, kneeling beside the worst damage. "They knew exactly which beams to burn, the ones already weakened by the excavation." "How would they know that?" "Someone who saw the county's report, or someone who did the original sabotage." Lucas stood, brushing ash from his knees. "Or both." "The county inspector." "Maybe. Or maybe someone with access to his files." Victoria's phone buzzed. She checked it, and Lucas saw her face go pale in the flashlight's beam. "What?" She turned the phone toward him. An email, sender anonymous, subject line blank. The body contained a single sentence and an attached video file. "Walk away or watch this go viral." Lucas clicked the video. It took a moment to load, the progress bar crawling across the screen with agonizing slowness. Then it played. The footage was grainy, clearly shot from a distance with a telephoto lens, but the subjects were identifiable. Victoria and Lucas standing outside the house yesterday afternoon. The angle made it look intimate, her handing him the check, him pausing before taking it, their hands touching briefly. The video had been edited, cut to remove context, trimmed to show only moments that could be misinterpreted, her leaning close to speak quietly, him standing in her personal space. Both of them entering the house together. It looked like an affair. A CEO paying off her contractor lover. Nothing illegal, but enough to raise questions, enough to damage reputations, enough to make investors nervous and board members suspicious. When was this sent? Lucas asked. 4 minutes ago, while we were in the crawl space. So they're watching right now. Victoria scanned the tree line surrounding the property, her expression hardening. Let them watch. I'm not... Don't. Lucas grabbed her arm before she could finish the defiant statement. That's what they want. They want you angry. Want you to make a mistake. So what do we do? Lucas thought fast, his contractor's brain shifting gears from structural problems to strategic ones. We call their bluff. How? You're a CEO. You've dealt with blackmail before, right? Different kind. Corporate espionage, insider trading accusations. Not... She gestured at the phone. Not this. Principle's the same. They're threatening to release something damaging unless you comply, which means they think it's damaging enough to work. So we remove the power. Understanding dawned on Victoria's face. We release it ourselves. No, better. We acknowledge it exists and explain the context before they can spin it. Social media post. Professional statement. Whatever platform you use for company announcements. You hired a contractor to assess foundation damage. Here's the documentation. Here's the timeline. Here's the truth before anyone can twist it into something else. Victoria started typing on her phone immediately, her thumbs flying across the screen with practice speed. Lucas watched her work, impressed by how quickly she shifted from rattled to ruthless, from target to tactician. Done, she said after 90 seconds. Posted to the company's LinkedIn, Twitter, and my personal accounts. Statement says, I'm personally overseeing emergency repairs to a legacy family property, hired Lucas Hale of Hale Contracting based on his reputation for honest assessments, and I'm committed to preserving the structural integrity of a building with deep personal significance. You tagged me. Of course. Transparency. Plus it gives you credibility protection if they try to come after you separately. Lucas's phone immediately started buzzing with notification sounds. He ignored it. Sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder. The fire department, right on schedule. One more thing, Lucas said, before they get here. That glove I found yesterday, you should give it to the police. Along with the gas can. Create an official record even if nothing comes of it. You think the police will actually investigate? No, but I think whoever's behind this will hear that you're documenting everything, building a case, making noise instead of quietly disappearing. That might make them nervous. Or it might make them escalate again. Probably, but at least we'll see it coming. The fire trucks rounded the bend, red lights strobing through the morning mist. Victoria straightened her shoulders, smoothed her ash-stained blouse, and transformed before Lucas's eyes from exhausted fighter to composed CEO. The mask was back, the armor. But Lucas had seen what was underneath now. The woman who stayed up all night reading spreadsheets. The woman who'd pulled him from a burning crawl space without hesitation. The woman who smiled when someone finally understood what she was fighting for. The next 3 hours were a blur of questions and documentation and official statements. The fire chief was professional but skeptical, clearly wondering why anyone would deliberately set fire to a remote property. The police officer who arrived 40 minutes later was less professional and more openly dismissive, taking notes with the energy of someone filling out paperwork he knew would go nowhere. But Victoria handled them both with calm efficiency, providing facts without emotion, documentation without dramatics. She gave them the gas can, the glove, the county's original report, her own timeline of events. She turned the arson into a data problem, something to be analyzed rather than panicked over. Lucas stayed quiet, letting her take the lead, answering questions when asked, but mostly just observing. He was good at observing, good at reading the spaces between what people said and what they meant. And what the police officer meant, behind his professional courtesy, was simple. This is above my pay grade, and I'm not touching it. The fire chief was more sympathetic but equally helpless. I'll file the report as suspected arson. We'll send an investigator out later this week, but without witnesses or clear evidence of who started it. I understand, Victoria said. Thank you for responding so quickly. They left eventually, taking the gas can as evidence, but leaving behind a property that looked worse in full daylight than it had in the pre-dawn darkness. Smoke damage, water damage from the extinguisher foam, and 2 completely destroyed support beams that would need immediate replacement before the entire western corner collapsed. Lucas walked the perimeter of the house, assessing with fresh eyes. His original timeline of 10 days had just become impossible. With the new damage, he was looking at 2 weeks minimum, possibly 3 if he had to special order replacement beams. "How bad?" Victoria asked, coming to stand beside him. "Bad, but not catastrophic. The fire didn't spread to the main structure. We caught it in time." "We? You caught it. I just helped clean up." "You pulled me out when I couldn't see. That counts." Victoria was quiet for a moment, watching the sun climb higher over the ocean. The light caught the exhaustion in her face, the lines around her eyes, the tremor in her hands that she couldn't quite control. "I need to go home," she said finally. "Shower, change, make some calls, but I'll be back this afternoon to help however I can." "You don't need to." "Yes, I do." She turned to face him directly. "Someone just tried to burn down my mother's house while we were inside it. I'm not walking away. I'm not hiding. I'm staying right here and watching you rebuild what they tried to destroy." Lucas recognized the look in her eyes. He'd seen it in the mirror often enough over the past 3 years. The look of someone who'd drawn a line and refused to step back across it, consequences be damned. "Okay," he said, "but bring lunch. I work better on a full stomach." That earned him another small smile. "Deal." She drove away in her Mercedes, leaving Lucas alone with a damaged house and a growing list of materials he needed to order immediately. He spent the next hour on his phone, calling suppliers, pulling favors, explaining that he needed pressure-treated beams delivered to a remote coastal property by tomorrow afternoon, and yes, he knew that was impossible, but could they try anyway? Most said no. A few said maybe. One said yes, but quoted him a delivery fee that made his teeth hurt. Lucas paid it anyway. Victoria's $60,000 check would cover materials and then some. The timeline would be tight, but he'd worked tight timelines before. His phone rang while he was measuring the destroyed beams. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him hit the green button. "Mr. Hale?" The voice was male, smooth, cultured. The kind of voice that came from expensive education and expensive suits. "My name is Richard Morse. I believe we should talk." Lucas said nothing. "I know what happened this morning," Morse continued. "The fire, the police report, and I want you to know that wasn't me. I don't operate that way." "Then who does?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out. Someone's playing a dangerous game, Mr. Hale, using my name, creating the impression I'm behind this campaign against Miss Kane. But I assure you, I have no interest in acquiring her property through intimidation or violence. Just through legal pressure and strategic county inspections." A pause. Then, "You're perceptive. Yes, I've made offers. Yes, I've explored legitimate channels to acquire the property. But arson, threats? That's not business. That's criminal, and it puts both of you at risk." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think we share a common interest, finding out who's really behind this before someone gets killed." Lucas sat down on the porch steps, processing. Either Morse was telling the truth, or this was an incredibly sophisticated lie. Either way, the conversation shifted the geometry of the problem. "You could be lying," Lucas said. "I could be, but consider this. If I wanted the property badly enough to commit arson, why would I call you afterward and deny it? Why draw more attention to myself? To deflect suspicion. Too complicated, too risky. If I were guilty, the smart play would be silence." Lucas had to admit the logic held. "What do you want from me?" "Information. You're working on the property. You see things I don't. If you notice anything unusual, people watching, vehicles that don't belong, anything that suggests someone's monitoring the site, I'd appreciate a call." "Why would I help you?" "Because whoever's doing this is using me as cover, which means they're smart, well-funded, and committed to remaining invisible. Those are dangerous qualities, Mr. Hale. And they're pointed at you now, whether you like it or not." Morse rattled off a phone number. Lucas didn't write it down, but he didn't need to. His memory was good with numbers. "One more thing," Morse said. "Ms. Kane thinks I'm her enemy. For business reasons, I've allowed her to continue thinking that. But I'd prefer she didn't end up dead because someone's hiding behind my reputation. So protect her, Mr. Hale, whatever it takes." The line went dead. Lucas sat on the porch steps for a long time, watching the ocean throw itself against the rocks below, thinking about a CEO who played knight in shining armor, and a contractor who couldn't walk away from a promise, and whoever was pulling strings in the shadows, watching them both dance. His phone buzzed. A text from Marnie. Emma asking when you'll be home. Told her dinner. That's still true? Lucas checked his watch. 9:47 a.m. He had 8 hours to order materials, stabilize the damaged section, and make it home in time to keep another promise. Dinner, he texted back. Promise. Then he got to work. The property was silent except for wind and waves and the sound of Lucas's tools as he began the careful process of shoring up the damaged beams with temporary supports. It was delicate work, the kind that required focus and precision, the kind that let his mind quiet and his hands speak the only language they knew fluently. But part of him stayed alert, watching the tree line, listening for approaching vehicles, aware that somewhere out there, someone was watching back. Someone who'd already proven they were willing to burn it all down. Lucas just had to make sure they didn't get the chance. The temporary supports went up slowly, each one requiring precise placement and careful calculation. Lucas worked with the kind of methodical patience that came from years of understanding that rushing structural work didn't just risk the building, it risked lives. By noon, he'd stabilized the western corner enough that it wouldn't collapse under its own weight. But the real work still loomed ahead like a mountain he'd have to climb one careful foothold at a time. He was checking the alignment on the fourth support beam when he heard tires on gravel. Lucas's hand went instinctively to the hammer at his belt, then relaxed when he recognized the black Mercedes. Victoria emerged carrying 2 paper bags that smelled like heaven and looked like they'd come from somewhere that didn't believe in fast food. "I said bring lunch," Lucas called out, "not cater a wedding. I don't do anything halfway." She set the bags on a relatively clean section of porch. "Besides, you're doing me a $60,000 favor. The least I can do is feed you properly." Lucas washed his hands with bottled water from his truck and joined her. She'd brought real sandwiches from some artisan deli, the kind with ingredients he couldn't pronounce, along with pasta salad, fruit, and coffee that was still somehow hot. They ate in silence for a few minutes, sitting on the porch steps, looking out at the ocean that stretched to the horizon like a promise of escape neither of them could afford to take. "Morse called me," Lucas said finally. Victoria's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "When?" "This morning, while you were gone." Lucas recounted the conversation, watching her face cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally calculation. "He's lying," she said flatly. "This is classic Morse. Create chaos, then position himself as the reasonable party trying to restore order." "Maybe, but what if he's not? Then who's behind this?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Lucas took a long drink of coffee, organizing his thoughts. "You said Morse has been trying to buy this property for 2 years. What happened 2 years ago? What changed?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. "My mother died 2 years and 3 months ago. The property transferred to me. A month later, Morse made his first offer. How did he know it was available? Public records, estate transfer, it's all documented. But something in her voice suggested she was working through a puzzle she hadn't fully assembled yet. Who else knew your mother was sick before she died? Her doctors, the hospice nurses, me, my lawyer. Victoria set down her fork. And my business partner. Lucas waited. James Chen. We founded Kane Properties together 12 years ago. He's the CFO. Handles all the financial operations while I handle development and acquisitions. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through something. When my mother got her diagnosis, I told him I'd need to take time off. Be with her. He was supportive, understanding, told me to take whatever time I needed. And then a week after her funeral, he started pushing me to sell this property. Said it was dead weight on the company's balance sheet. Said we could use the capital for better investments. I said no. He pushed harder. We fought about it for months. Victoria's fingers tightened on her phone. 6 months ago, he stopped pushing, said he understood it was personal, that he'd respect my decision. She looked up at Lucas. That's when the problem started. First the excavation around the foundation, then the county inspection. Now the arson. You think your business partner's trying to force you to sell. I think my business partner might be working with Morse, or working for him. I don't know anymore. The exhaustion was back in her voice, the weight of fighting enemies she couldn't see. James has access to everything: company files, property records, my schedule. He'd know when I'd be here, when you'd be here. Lucas thought about the video, the one shot from a distance with a telephoto lens. Does he have the resources to hire surveillance? Someone to watch the property? He has the company credit card and no oversight when I'm not looking. Victoria stood abruptly, pacing the length of the porch. I've been so focused on Morse, I never considered that the threat might be coming from inside my own company. You need to verify it before you accuse him. How? Lucas pulled out his phone and opened the photo gallery, scrolling to the pictures he'd taken of the work glove. This was left in the crawl space, fresh soil on it. You said you had the property inspected 3 months ago, before you refinanced. Do you still have the inspector's contact information? Yes. Why? Because I want to know if he was working alone or if someone accompanied him, and I want to know if he wore gloves that looked like this. Understanding lit Victoria's face. She was already dialing before Lucas finished speaking. The conversation lasted 5 minutes. When Victoria hung up, her expression had hardened into something dangerous. The inspector worked alone, she said, and he doesn't wear leather work gloves. He has a latex allergy, uses nitrile. Always has. She looked at the photo on Lucas's phone. Someone else has been under this house. Someone who wanted it to look like routine inspection work. James? James doesn't do field work. He's never been on a job site in his life. But he could have hired someone. Someone who'd know how to sabotage a foundation without being obvious about it. Lucas stood, brushing sandwich crumbs from his jeans. There's one way to find out. Set a trap. What kind of trap? Tell James you're planning to sell, that the damage is too extensive, the repairs too expensive, and you've decided to cut your losses. See how he reacts. Victoria shook her head. If he's behind this, telling him I'm giving up just gives him what he wants. No, it gives him confidence. Makes him think he's won. People get sloppy when they think they've won. They celebrate, they talk, they make mistakes. Lucas met her eyes. And while he's being sloppy, we finish the repairs and document everything. Build a case solid enough that when you finally confront him, he can't talk his way out. That's a big risk. If I'm wrong about James, I've just damaged my relationship with the only person who's been loyal to me for 12 years. And if you're right, you've identified the person who's been trying to destroy you. Victoria walked to the porch railing, gripping it with both hands, staring out at the ocean. Lucas gave her space to think, to calculate the odds, to weigh loyalty against survival. Finally, she turned back. I'll call him tonight, after I've had time to make it convincing. Her voice was steady, but Lucas could see the cost in her eyes. If James is innocent, I'll apologize and explain. If he's not, we make sure he faces consequences. Is that your contractor's guarantee? That's my promise. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning they both understood. Promises were currency in their world, the only currency that still mattered when everything else failed. Victoria's phone buzzed. She checked it, and Lucas saw her face go pale. What now? She turned the screen toward him. Another email, another anonymous sender, another threat. But this one was different. The attached image showed Emma's school, wide shot, taken from across the street, showing kids on the playground during recess. And in the center of the frame, circled in red, was a girl with dark hair and pigtails, wearing a purple jacket Lucas had bought her for her birthday. The message below the photo was simple. She's 7, right? Cute age. Be a shame if something happened. Lucas's vision went white at the edges. His hands started shaking, not from fear, but from rage, so pure it felt like electricity in his veins. Someone had photographed his daughter. Someone had gone to her school, watched her play, circled her like prey. Lucas? Victoria's voice came from somewhere far away. Lucas, breathe. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't think past the image of Emma on that playground, unaware she was being watched, unprotected, vulnerable in ways that made his chest feel like it was caving in. I'm calling the police, Victoria said, already dialing. This is a direct threat against a child. They have to... Lucas grabbed the phone from her hand and ended the call. Don't. Lucas, this is serious. This is... I know what this is. His voice came out flat, dead. This is someone telling me they can reach her anytime they want, and calling the police won't stop them. It'll just make them more careful next time. Then what do we do? Lucas was already moving toward his truck, his mind running through logistics with crystal clarity. I'm pulling Emma out of school, taking her to my sister's place in Sacramento, somewhere these people can't find her. That's 3 hours away. Good. Means I'll have 3 hours to think about what I'm going to do to whoever sent this. Victoria followed him to the truck. You can't just leave. The repairs don't matter if my daughter's in danger. Lucas, listen to me. Victoria grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop. If you run, they win. They're trying to scare you off, make you abandon the job, and the moment you do, they'll move on to the next phase of whatever plan they're executing. I don't care about your property. I care about Emma. I know you do. Victoria's grip tightened. But think about this logically. Whoever sent that photo didn't hurt her, didn't approach her, just photographed her, which means this is intimidation, not action. They're banking on you being terrified enough to walk away. It's working. Then don't give them the satisfaction. Victoria released his arm but stepped in front of him, blocking his path to the truck. Call your sister. Have her pick up Emma from school early. Take her somewhere safe for a few days. But don't you leave. Don't you give up on finishing what you started. Lucas wanted to push past her, wanted to get in his truck and drive until he had Emma in his arms, and they were both far away from coastal properties and corporate conspiracies and people who photograph children to make a point. But Victoria was right. Running now meant whoever sent that photo controlled him completely, meant they could threaten Emma anytime Lucas did something they didn't like, meant his daughter would grow up learning that promises didn't matter when things got scary, and Lucas had promised Emma he would never leave, would never stop fighting, would never teach her that fear was stronger than commitment. He pulled out his phone with hands that still shook and called Marnie. She answered on the second ring. Hey, I was just about to text you. Emma's science project. Marnie, I need you to listen carefully. Lucas kept his voice level, professional. I need you to go to Emma's school right now. Check her out early. Tell them it's a family emergency. Oh, Lucas, what's going on? I can't explain right now, but I need you to take her to Sacramento, to your apartment. Keep her there for a few days. Don't tell anyone where you're going. And Marnie? He closed his eyes. Don't let her out of your sight. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Lucas thought the call had dropped. Then Marnie's voice came back, stripped of its usual lightness. Someone threatened her. Yes. Are you safe? I will be. Once I know she is. I'm leaving now. I'll call you when we're on the road. Thank you. Lucas, whatever you're involved in, be careful. Emma needs her father. I know. He ended the call and stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, forcing his heart rate down, pushing the rage into a box he could open later when it would be useful instead of paralyzing. Victoria hadn't moved. She watched him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe, or recognition of the cost he was paying to stay. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. If anything happens to her, it won't. We won't let it. Lucas walked back to the house and picked up his tools with hands that had finally stopped shaking. I'm working through the night, every night until this is done. I want this property repaired and reinforced so thoroughly that when you present it to your board, there's no question it's structurally sound. That'll take 5 days, maybe 6. I don't sleep much anyway. He looked at her directly. But I need something from you. Name it. I need you to find out who's behind this. Use your resources, your connections, whatever it takes, because when I'm done fixing this foundation, I'm going to need a name and an address. Victoria understood immediately. Lucas, if you go after them, I'm not going to do anything stupid, but I'm going to make sure they understand that threatening my daughter has consequences. That sounds like something stupid. Then it'll fit right in with the rest of my decisions this week. Despite everything, Victoria almost smiled. You're a complicated man, Mr. Hale. I'm a simple man in a complicated situation. Lucas hefted his tool bag. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have 5 days of work to do and no patience left for conversations. He worked until sunset, then kept working under portable lights he'd set up around the damaged section. Victoria stayed, ostensibly to help, but mostly just to hand him tools and hold flashlights and provide the kind of steady presence that made the work feel less like a solitary war and more like a shared campaign. Around midnight, Marnie called. "We're in Sacramento," she said. "Emma's asleep in the guest room. She asked why we left so fast. I told her you needed us to test out a surprise vacation spot." She believed that? She's 7. She believes most things. A pause. "Lucas, she drew you another picture in the car. You and her, holding hands on a beach. The sun's still yellow and perfect." Lucas's throat tightened. Keep her drawing those. Keep her believing the sun is perfect. "I will. You just make sure you come back to see them." After Marnie hung up, Lucas stood in the darkness for a long moment, listening to the ocean and the wind and the sound of his own breathing. Then he went back to work. Victoria left around 2 in the morning, exhausted and swaying on her feet. Lucas barely noticed. He was deep in the rhythm of the work now, the physical labor burning off the rage and fear and helplessness until all that remained was purpose. By the time the sun rose on the second day, he'd replaced both destroyed beams with temporary supports and begun the process of stabilizing the foundation piers. The permanent repairs would take longer, but the house was no longer in danger of immediate collapse. Progress. Measurable. Real. His phone rang at 7 a.m. Victoria. "I did it," she said without preamble. "I called James last night, told him I was planning to sell, that I'd accepted the damage was too extensive and I couldn't afford the emotional cost of fighting anymore." How did he react? He was sympathetic, understanding, told me it was the right decision, that he'd start reaching out to potential buyers immediately. Her voice went cold. "And then this morning, I got a call from Morse." Lucas set down his coffee. What did he want? To make an offer, a formal one, for significantly less than market value, citing the extensive damage and necessary repairs. Victoria's laugh was bitter. "He knew about the fire, Lucas, knew about the specific beams that were destroyed. Details I never made public. Details that were only in the report I sent to James last night. So James is feeding Morse information. More than that, James structured the offer. I recognized his language in the proposal, his phrasing. This isn't just information sharing, they're actively colluding." Lucas wiped sawdust from his hands, thinking. But that still doesn't explain the escalation. The arson. The threats. If they're working together, why not just wait you out? Make reasonable offers until you eventually accept? "Because there's a timeline I didn't tell you about." Victoria's voice dropped. "The company's debt restructuring comes due in 60 days. If I can't liquidate enough assets to make the payment, we default. James knows that. He's been CFO long enough to know exactly how desperate our situation is. So he's not just trying to buy the property. He's trying to force you into bankruptcy so he can pick up the pieces." That's what I thought. But then I started digging into Morse's financials, the public records you can access if you know where to look. Victoria paused. "He's broke, Lucas. His company's drowning in debt. He doesn't have the capital to buy this property, even at a discount." The geometry of the problem shifted again, pieces rearranging into a pattern Lucas couldn't quite see yet. Then why is he making offers? Because someone else is funding him. Someone who wants this property badly enough to bankroll a broke developer and sabotage me in the process. Who would want it that badly? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Determination hardened Victoria's voice. "I'm hiring a forensic accountant, someone who can trace the money flowing into Morse's accounts. And I'm filing a complaint with the state bar about the county inspector. Create enough noise that whoever's hiding in the shadows has to deal with exposure. That'll make them desperate." Good. Desperate people make mistakes. Lucas thought about Emma's photo, about the message that came with it. They've already proven they'll target anyone close to you. You need protection. I have a security system, and I've contacted a private security firm. That's not enough. These people know where you live, where you work, where I work. They've been watching long enough to know our patterns. Lucas made a decision. "I'm sleeping here, on site, until the repairs are done." "Lucas, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is. If they come back to finish what they started with the fire, I want to be here, and I want them to know I'm here." You're making yourself a target. I'm already a target. Might as well be a useful one. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm staying too." "No. It's my property, my fight. I'm not hiding while you put yourself in danger. You have a company to run. board meetings, investors to manage. I can do all of that from here. I have a laptop and a cell phone. That's all I need. Her tone left no room for argument. Besides, someone needs to make sure you eat something other than gas station sandwiches. Despite everything, Lucas found himself almost smiling. You're stubborn. I'm committed. There's a difference. Is there? You tell me. You're the one working 18-hour days on a property someone keeps trying to destroy. Fair point. They worked out the logistics quickly. Victoria would bring supplies, set up a workspace in the house's still intact eastern wing. Lucas would continue the repairs during daylight, then patrol the property at night. They'd take shifts sleeping, never leaving the place unguarded. It was a terrible plan, unsustainable, the kind of thing that would burn them both out in a matter of days. But it was also the only plan they had. Lucas spent the rest of the day working with a focus that bordered on obsessive. Every beam he replaced, every pier he reinforced, every structural element he stabilized felt like a small victory against the people who'd threatened his daughter. The physical work channeled the rage into something productive, something that built instead of destroyed. Victoria arrived in the late afternoon with enough supplies to stock a small apartment. Sleeping bags, portable heater, cooler full of food, laptop, chargers, and a toolbox that made Lucas raise his eyebrows. I thought you didn't do field work, he said. I don't? But my mother did. She was a nurse, remember? She believed in being prepared. Victoria opened the toolbox to reveal a first aid kit that could handle everything from splinters to gunshot wounds. She used to say hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Smart woman. She was. Victoria's expression softened for just a moment. She would have liked you. She didn't trust people who made things look easy. Said if it looked easy, you weren't doing it right. Lucas thought about his own father, about lessons learned in crawl spaces and on rooftops, about the honest weight of real work. She sounds like someone who understood the difference between looking good and being good. That's exactly what she understood. Victoria set up her laptop on a makeshift desk, 2 sawhorses and a sheet of plywood, which is why she never trusted James. She told me once that he smiled too much for someone who dealt with money all day, said people who work with numbers usually look more serious. You didn't listen. I thought she was being paranoid, overprotective. Victoria's fingers tightened on the laptop. I should have listened. They fell into a rhythm over the next few hours. Lucas worked while Victoria made calls, sent emails, coordinated with her forensic accountant and her lawyer and her security team. As the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked too beautiful for how dangerous everything had become, they ate dinner together on the porch. More sandwiches from the same artisan deli, because Victoria apparently knew only one lunch place, but it was a good one. The accountant found something, Victoria said between bites. 3 months ago, Morse's company received a wire transfer for $2 million. Origin account is buried behind shell corporations, but they're tracing it. $2 million is enough to fund a lot of sabotage, and enough to make a down payment on this property if I'm forced to sell below market value. Victoria pulled up something on her phone. But here's the interesting part. The transfer happened 2 days after I told James about my mother's death. Before the funeral, before the estate transferred, before anyone outside my immediate circle even knew this property would be available. Lucas set down his sandwich. Someone was planning this before your mother died. Someone was planning this while she was dying. The implications settled over them like a weight. This wasn't opportunistic corporate maneuvering. This was premeditated, calculated. Someone had watched Victoria's mother fade and seen not tragedy, but opportunity. How long was she sick? Lucas asked quietly. 6 months from diagnosis to death. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and brutal. Victoria's voice stayed level, but Lucas could hear the cost. I told exactly 3 people about her diagnosis the day we got the news. My lawyer, because I needed to update my will. My accountant, because I needed to restructure some personal finances. And James. One of them is involved. Or all of them. Or none of them. And someone else found out through channels I haven't considered. Victoria stood, pacing the porch. I've spent the last 12 years building a company, making deals, trusting people who seem trustworthy. And now I'm looking at everyone like they're potentially trying to destroy me. Do you know how exhausting that is? Lucas did know. He'd spent months after his wife left analyzing every conversation they'd ever had, every moment where he might have missed a sign. every friend who might have known something he didn't. The paranoia was corrosive. It ate away at your ability to trust anyone, including yourself. You can't think like that, he said. You'll drive yourself crazy. Too late. No, not too late. Lucas stood, meeting her eyes across the darkening porch. Someone is betraying you, that's true. But not everyone. Not me. Not your mother. Not the people who actually matter. Focus on them. Let the investigation handle the rest. Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and Lucas saw something shift in her expression. The armor cracked a little wider. The exhaustion showed through more clearly, but underneath both there was something else, something that looked like relief. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Really? I know you said you don't quit. I know you made a promise, but there are promises, and then there's sleeping on a construction site because someone you barely know is fighting a war she might lose." Lucas considered several answers. All of them were partially true. None of them were complete. "My daughter draws pictures where I'm always smiling," he said finally, "where the sun is always perfect and yellow, where everything is safe and good. And I want her to keep believing that's possible, that the world has people in it who keep their promises, who fight for what's right even when it's hard." He looked out at the ocean, at the waves that never stopped coming, no matter how many times they broke against the rocks. "If I walk away now, if I let these people win because they threatened her, then I'm teaching Emma that fear is stronger than commitment, that promises only matter when they're convenient, and I won't do that. I won't teach her that the world is a place where the bad guys always win because the good guys always quit." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she crossed the porch and did something Lucas didn't expect. She hugged him. Not long, not awkward, just a brief, fierce embrace that said thank you and I understand and we're in this together without needing words. When she stepped back, her eyes were bright but her voice was steady. "Let's make sure the good guys win this time." Lucas nodded. "Let's." They worked until midnight, Lucas on the foundation and Victoria on her laptop, each fighting their separate battles toward the same goal. When exhaustion finally forced them to stop, they set up their sleeping bags in the intact eastern wing, separate rooms, doors open, close enough to hear if something went wrong. Lucas lay in the darkness, listening to the wind and the waves and the settling house, his hammer within easy reach. Tomorrow, he'd make more progress on the repairs. Tomorrow, Victoria's accountant might trace the money. Tomorrow, they'd be one day closer to either victory or disaster. But tonight, Emma was safe in Sacramento, drawing pictures of yellow suns. And that was enough to let Lucas close his eyes and rest. The sound that woke Lucas at 3:17 a.m. wasn't loud. It was subtle. The crunch of gravel under careful feet, the kind of noise someone made when they were trying to be quiet, but hadn't accounted for a contractor's ear trained to detect structural shifts in sleeping houses. He was on his feet before his mind fully processed the movement, hammer in hand, moving silently toward the window. The moon was 3/4 full, throwing enough silver light across the property that Lucas could make out shapes in the darkness. Two figures, moving toward the crawl space, both wearing dark clothing, both carrying something Lucas couldn't identify from this distance. He crossed to Victoria's room in 3 strides. She was already awake, sitting up in her sleeping bag, phone in hand. "I heard," she whispered. "I'm calling." Lucas put a hand over her phone. "No time. They'll be gone before anyone arrives." "Then what do we do?" Lucas looked at his hammer, then at Victoria, then back at the window where the figures had disappeared beneath the house. Every instinct screamed at him to stay inside, to wait for professionals, to not do the stupid thing. But stupid seemed to be his specialty this week. "Stay here. Lock the door. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, call the police." "Oh, Lucas, don't!" He was already moving, slipping out the back door into the cold coastal night, his boots finding the gravel path by memory rather than sight. The wind covered the sound of his approach, and Lucas used it, angling wide around the house to come at the crawl space from the opposite direction they'd expect. He could hear them now, voices low and tense, echoing up through the foundation. "Told you to use the liquid accelerant, not the powder. This is going to take too long. It'll work the same. Just need to spread it along all the new supports." Lucas's blood went cold. They weren't just sabotaging the repairs. They were preparing to burn the entire foundation, and with the amount of accelerant they were talking about, the fire would spread to the main structure within minutes. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was destruction. He moved closer, peering through the gap where the porch had pulled away, and got his first clear look at the figures. Both male, both young, maybe late 20s. One wore a baseball cap identical to the one the arsonist had worn during the first fire. The other had a backpack that looked heavy with supplies. Neither was James Chen. Neither was Richard Morse. These were hired hands following orders, probably paid enough to take risks, but not enough to ask questions. Lucas made a decision that was either brave or suicidal. He pulled out his phone, set it to video record, and propped it in a gap between foundation stones where it would capture everything. Then he circled around to the crawlspace entrance they'd used and waited. 3 minutes later, the first figure emerged, brushing dirt from his jacket. Lucas let him take 2 steps before speaking. "Forget something?" The man spun, hand diving toward his pocket. Lucas was faster. He closed the distance in one stride and slammed the hammer into the ground next to the man's foot, the impact sending gravel spraying. "Don't," Lucas said quietly. "I'm having a bad week, and I'm really hoping you give me a reason to make it yours too." The man froze. Up close, he looked even younger, mid-20s, with acne scars and the kind of nervous energy that suggested this wasn't his first crime, but definitely wasn't his 100th. "We're just doing a job," the man said, hands slowly rising. "Nothing personal." Arson is always personal to the person whose property you're burning. "Look, man, we were just paid to—" The second figure erupted from the crawl space like a startled animal, saw Lucas, and made the mistake of reaching for his backpack. Lucas didn't give him time to finish the motion. He moved forward, using his size and momentum to knock the man backward, away from whatever weapon or accelerant he was reaching for. They went down together, rolling in the gravel, and Lucas felt something in his ribs protest. Old injury from a fall 3 years ago, never quite healed right. He ignored it, using his weight to pin the younger man down, his hammer pressed across the guy's chest. "Stop. Moving." The man stopped. Lucas became aware of several things simultaneously. Victoria was standing on the porch with her phone raised, filming everything. The first arsonist had run. He could hear footsteps retreating down the gravel drive. And the man beneath him was breathing fast and shallow, the kind of breathing that preceded either violence or panic. "Who hired you?" Lucas asked. "I don't know. We got paid through a drop. Cash in an envelope, instructions but no names." "What were the instructions?" "Make it look like the foundation failed. Natural collapse. No evidence of tampering." The man's eyes were wide, scared. "We weren't supposed to hurt anyone. Just the building. Just make it uninhabitable." "By burning it down. By making it look like it burned down on its own. Old house, faulty wiring, that kind of thing." Lucas increased the pressure slightly. "Who delivered the envelope?" "I don't know. Some guy in a suit. Expensive car. That's all I saw." "What kind of car?" "I don't know cars, man. It was silver, German maybe. Had one of those hood ornaments." Victoria spoke from the porch, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Mercedes or BMW?" "Mercedes, yeah. The circle thing with the star." Lucas felt Victoria's presence before he saw her, moving to stand beside him, her phone still recording, her expression carved from ice. "James drives a silver Mercedes," she said. "E-Class. He's very proud of it." The man beneath Lucas tried to process this information and clearly decided he didn't get paid enough. "Look, I'll tell you everything I know, but I need you to let me up. I can't breathe." Lucas stood slowly, keeping the hammer ready. The arsonist scrambled to his feet, holding his ribs, looking between Lucas and Victoria like he was calculating his chances of running. "Don't," Victoria said. "I've already sent the video to 3 different people. You run now. You're just making it worse for yourself." "What do you want?" "I want you to empty that backpack, slowly. Then I want you to tell me exactly what you were supposed to do tonight." The arsonist complied, pulling out containers of accelerant powder, rags, matches, and what looked like a crude timing device. Everything you'd need to start a fire that would look accidental to a cursory investigation, but would completely destroy the foundation Lucas had spent 4 days repairing. "We were supposed to spread the powder along all the new support beams," the man said, his voice shaking now. "Light it with a delayed fuse. Give us time to get clear before it caught. Make it look like spontaneous combustion from chemical interaction with the wood treatment." That's not how wood treatment works, Lucas said. I know, I told the guy who hired us. He said it didn't matter. Said the fire marshal would buy it because nobody checks too carefully on remote properties. Victoria's fingers were white where they gripped her phone. When were you hired? 3 days ago, same day the last fire happened. Guy said the first one didn't do enough damage, needed to finish the job. And you didn't think that was suspicious? The arsonist laughed, a bitter sound. Lady, I'm being paid 10 grand to burn down an empty house. I don't get paid to think. I get paid to do what I'm told and not ask questions. $10,000, Victoria repeated slowly. For one night's work. 5 for me, 5 for my partner, split down the middle. Lucas did the math. 10,000 for the arsonists, probably more for whoever orchestrated the surveillance, the county inspection, the original sabotage. Someone was spending serious money to destroy this property, far more than the land was worth even at market value, which meant the property itself wasn't the target. Victoria was the target. Lucas saw her reach the same conclusion, saw it settle over her features like a shadow. Call the police, she said to Lucas. Then to the arsonist, you're going to tell them everything, every detail, every instruction, and you're going to identify the man who hired you from a photo lineup. I cooperate. I'm dead. These people don't mess around. You don't cooperate. You're going to jail for attempted arson, and I'll make sure the prosecutor knows you refuse to help. Victoria's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Your choice, prison or witness protection. Pick one. The arsonist looked between them, weighing options that all ended badly, and finally nodded. I want a lawyer, and I want protection before I say anything else. You'll get both. Victoria turned to Lucas. Make the call. Lucas dialed while Victoria kept filming, documenting everything with the kind of methodical precision that suggested she'd thought about this scenario before. The arsonist sat on the ground, head in his hands, probably realizing that $10,000 wasn't worth whatever came next. The police arrived 23 minutes later, 2 patrol cars with lights strobing red and blue across the cypress trees. The same officer who'd taken the report about the first fire stepped out, saw Lucas and Victoria and the arsonist and the backpack full of accelerant, and sighed like a man watching his quiet night shift evaporate. Ms. Kane, Mr. Hale, why am I not surprised? Officer Brennan, Victoria's professional mask was firmly back in place. We've detained a suspect in tonight's attempted arson. He's indicated willingness to cooperate in exchange for protection and counsel. Brennan looked at the arsonist, then at the backpack, then at Lucas still holding his hammer. Anyone hurt? No, Lucas said. But it was close. The next 2 hours were a procedural blur. Statements, evidence collection. The arsonist, whose name turned out to be Danny Sutter, 26, with a record of minor offenses but nothing violent, was cuffed and placed in a patrol car. His backpack and all its contents were bagged and tagged. Lucas's phone and Victoria's phone were both entered as evidence, the videos uploaded to the department's server. Through it all, Officer Brennan maintained a professional distance that felt increasingly like strategic retreat. He asked the right questions, filled out the right forms, but Lucas could see the calculation in his eyes. This case was getting too big, too complicated, touching too many powerful people. We'll need you both to come to the station tomorrow, Brennan said as he prepared to leave. Full statements. Detective Ramirez will want to interview you personally. Will Danny Sutter be charged? Victoria asked. That's up to the DA. But with this much evidence, yeah, he'll be charged. Whether he stays charged or cuts a deal depends on what he tells us. After the police left, Lucas and Victoria stood in the driveway watching the taillights disappear down Cypress Ridge Road. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, dawn creeping toward them with the promise of another day they'd have to survive. They're running out of options, Victoria said quietly. Whoever's behind this. The sabotage failed, the fire failed, the intimidation didn't work. They're going to try something more direct. Let them try. Lucas felt the exhaustion pulling at him, but pushed it back. I'm finishing the repairs today. All of them. Every beam, every support, every compromised section. By sunset, this foundation will be stronger than it was before any of this started. That's impossible. You said 2 weeks minimum. I lied. I can do it in 6 days if I work smart and don't sleep. Lucas turned to look at her. And today's day 6. Not bad. Victoria studied him in the growing light, And Lucas knew what she was seeing, a man who'd been pushed past his limits and found reserves he didn't know he had. A man who'd made promises to a 7-year-old girl and a dying woman he'd never met, and who'd decided those promises mattered more than sleep or safety or common sense. "I'll help," she said. "You don't know how. Then teach me. I can hand you tools. Hold flashlights, whatever you need." She straightened her shoulders. "My mother didn't raise someone who stood by watching while other people fought her battles." Lucas almost argued, almost told her to stay safe, stay out of the way, let him finish the work alone. But he understood what she was really saying. This wasn't about construction. This was about refusing to be a victim, about standing on ground that belonged to her and refusing to be moved. "Okay," he said, "but you follow my instructions exactly. Structural work isn't forgiving of mistakes." "Neither am I." They worked through the dawn and into the full morning, Lucas directing and Victoria learning fast, her hands steady even when the work was hard. She didn't complain about splinters or sore muscles or the physical toll of labor her office job had never prepared her for. She just kept moving, kept helping, kept proving that she was serious about standing her ground. By noon, Lucas had replaced all the damaged support beams with permanent reinforcements, doubled the load-bearing capacity on the western corner, and stabilized every foundation pier with additional concrete and steel bracing. The work was brutal, compressed into hours instead of days, held together by expertise and determination and the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that ran in Lucas's blood. Victoria's phone rang while Lucas was tightening the final support bolt. She answered, listened for 30 seconds, and her face went pale. "When?" she asked. Then, "I'll be there in an hour." She ended the call and looked at Lucas with an expression that combined rage and something that looked like vindication. "That was my forensic accountant." She traced the money. Lucas set down his wrench. "And?" "The $2 million that went to Morse came from a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. The holding company is owned by 3 partners. Richard Morse is one. James Chen is another." Victoria's hands were shaking. "The third partner is my lawyer, David Brenner, the man who's handled every legal document I've signed for the past decade." The betrayal hit Lucas even though the lawyer wasn't his. He could see what it cost Victoria, watching her realize that people she'd trusted with everything had been systematically dismantling her life. "Both of them," she said quietly. "My CFO and my lawyer, working together, using Morse as a front while they positioned themselves to buy my assets at bankruptcy prices." She laughed, but it sounded broken. "I spent 12 years building a company with James, 12 years trusting him with every financial decision, and he's been planning this since my mother got sick." "You can't know that for sure." "Yes, I can." Victoria pulled up an email on her phone and showed it to Lucas. "The accountant found this. Email from James to Brenner, sent 2 weeks after my mother's diagnosis. Subject line, opportunity timeline. The body discusses how long terminal pancreatic cancer usually takes and when they should start positioning assets for acquisition." Lucas read the email and felt his hands curl into fists. They'd calculated her mother's death like a business opportunity, marked it on a calendar, planned their betrayal while Victoria sat in hospitals and held her mother's hand through chemotherapy. "I'm going to destroy them," Victoria said, and her voice was so cold it made Lucas take a step back. "I'm going to take everything they tried to take from me, and I'm going to use it to bury them so deep they'll never see daylight again." "How?" "By doing exactly what they don't expect, by not selling, by presenting this property to my board as a fully restored asset worth more than they ever imagined." She looked at the house. At the foundation, Lucas had spent 6 days reinforcing, by fighting instead of folding. "Your board meeting is when?" "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. I present our quarterly financials and asset valuations, including this property." Victoria met his eyes. "Can you give me documentation?" "Engineering reports that prove this building is structurally sound, that the foundation exceeds current code requirements?" "I can do better than that. I can give you a certification that this is one of the most solid foundations on the California coast, because as of about 10 minutes ago it is." Lucas walked to his truck and pulled out his laptop, the one he used for official reports and engineering calculations. He spent the next hour documenting everything he'd done, every measurement, every reinforcement, every upgrade that transformed a sabotage structure into something that could withstand earthquakes and time and whatever else the universe threw at it. When he finished, he had a 30-page report complete with photos, calculations, and his professional certification as a licensed contractor and structural engineer. He printed it using a portable printer he kept for job sites and handed the still warm pages to Victoria. She read through it quickly, her expression shifting from focus to something that looked like hope. "This is bulletproof," she said. "That's the idea. Anyone who questions it will have to question my professional credentials, and I've been doing this for 15 years without a single failed inspection." Victoria clutched the report like it was made of gold. "I need to go. Meet with the accountant, then my lawyer for what he thinks is a routine asset review. I'm not tipping my hand until the board meeting tomorrow." "What about James?" "James will be at the board meeting, required attendance for all C-suite executives." Her smile was sharp enough to cut. "He'll walk in thinking he's about to watch me surrender. Instead, he's going to watch me fight back with documentation he can't refute and evidence he can't deny." "Be careful. Cornered people do desperate things." "Let them be desperate. I'm done being afraid." She left in her Mercedes, tires spitting gravel, and Lucas was alone again with a house that had become something more than wood and foundation. It was a symbol now, a line drawn in sand that had hardened into concrete. He spent the afternoon cleaning up, packing his tools, documenting the final state of the property with photographs that showed every angle, every repair, every reinforcement. The work was done. The promise was kept. His phone rang. Marnie. "Hey," she said. "Emma wants to talk to you. Put her on." A moment later, his daughter's voice filled his ear, bright and perfect, and completely unaware of how close Lucas had come to failing her. "Daddy, Aunt Marnie says we're having a vacation. Can we go to the beach tomorrow?" "Soon, sweetheart, really soon. How's Sacramento?" "It's okay, but I miss you, and I made you another picture. It's you and me and Aunt Marnie all holding hands. Want me to describe it?" Lucas sat down on the porch steps, suddenly unable to stand. "Yeah, Em, describe it for me." She did, in detail, that only a 7-year-old could provide, explaining the colors and the proportions and why everyone was smiling. And Lucas listened, letting her voice wash over him like medicine for wounds he hadn't realized he'd taken. When she was done, Marnie came back on the line. "She's okay, Lucas. We're both okay. Are you?" "Yeah," he said, and meant it. "Yeah, I think I am." "When are you coming to get her?" "Tomorrow night, after Victoria's board meeting. After this whole thing is finally over. And if it's not over, then I'll come get her anyway, because she matters more than any of this." "I know she does. Just making sure you remember." After he hung up, Lucas sat on the porch watching the sun descend toward the Pacific, painting the sky in colors that looked too beautiful for how ugly the week had been. Tomorrow, Victoria would face her betrayers. Tomorrow, this would either end or escalate into something worse. But tonight, the foundation was solid. The promise was kept. And somewhere in Sacramento, Emma was drawing pictures where everyone smiled and held hands, and the sun was always perfect and yellow. That had to count for something. Lucas locked up the house, checked every window and door twice, and drove down Cypress Ridge Road for what he hoped was the last time as a defender rather than just a contractor. His body ached in places he'd forgotten could ache. His hands were covered in cuts and calluses that would take weeks to heal. His ribs still protested from tackling the arsonist, but the work was done. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Confrontations and revelations and the kind of dramatic conclusion that only happened in movies, except this wasn't a movie. This was real life, where the good guys sometimes lost and the bad guys sometimes walked away. But not this time. Lucas wouldn't let them. He drove home through the darkness, past the ocean that never lied, toward an empty house that waited for a daughter who would return soon. And for the first time in 6 days, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd done enough. That maybe promises could be kept after all, even when the whole world tried to break them. The morning of the board meeting arrived with fog so thick, Lucas could barely see his own driveway. He'd slept 4 hours, woken with his ribs aching and his hands stiff, and spent another hour reviewing every page of the structural report one final time. Not because he doubted his work, but because he knew what was coming would be brutal, and Victoria would need ammunition that couldn't be questioned. His phone buzzed at 8 a.m. "Victoria, I need you at the meeting," she said without preamble. In person. The board will want to question the engineering report directly. Lucas had been expecting this. What time? 1:30. Before the official start. I want you there when James and Brenner arrive. I want them to see that I didn't come alone. Where? She gave him an address in downtown San Francisco, a high-rise office building that probably cost more per square foot than Lucas's entire house. He agreed, hung up, and immediately called Marnie. I need one more day, he said when she answered. Then I'm coming to get Emma, I promise. Lucas, she's starting to ask harder questions. She's 7, not stupid. She knows something's wrong. I know. And tomorrow I'll tell her the truth. Age-appropriate version, but the truth. That sometimes people try to hurt the things we care about, and sometimes we have to fight back. Marnie was quiet for a moment. You sure you want to teach her that lesson this young? She already learned that mothers leave. This lesson might actually help. Okay, but Lucas, don't make me have to explain to her why her father isn't coming back. I won't. He drove to San Francisco through fog that didn't clear until he was crossing the Bay Bridge, the city rising ahead of him like a promise or a threat depending on how you looked at it. Lucas parked in a garage that charged more per hour than he usually made in half a day, and took an elevator to the 32nd floor where Kane Properties maintained its corporate offices. Victoria met him in the lobby. She wore a charcoal suit that looked like armor, her hair pulled back tight, her expression composed in a way that didn't quite hide the tension underneath, but her eyes were clear, focused, ready. Thank you for coming, she said. You're paying me to fix foundations. This is just an extension of the job. No, it's not. This is you standing beside me when you could have walked away a week ago. She handed him a visitor badge. The board is in conference room A. James and Brenner don't know you'll be here. I want to see their faces when you walk in. What about Morse? Morse isn't coming. I made sure of that. Victoria's smile was cold. I told James that Morse and I had reached a private settlement, that I was selling the property to him directly, outside the board's oversight. James thinks he's already won. And Brenner? Brenner thinks he's here to finalize the sale documents. Neither of them know about the arrest last night. Neither of them know I have their emails. They're walking into an ambush. Lucas followed her through glass doors into a conference room that occupied an entire corner of the building, windows offering views of the bay and the city and the kind of wealth that came from making the right decisions and crushing the right competitors. The conference table could seat 20. Currently it held 8 people, all in expensive suits, all looking at Victoria with expressions that ranged from sympathetic to predatory. James Chen sat at the far end, his silver hair perfectly styled, his posture relaxed. Next to him sat a man Lucas assumed was David Brenner, 50s, expensive watch, the kind of smooth confidence that came from never having to do physical labor. They both looked up when Victoria entered, and their expressions shifted slightly when they saw Lucas behind her. Confusion, concern, not quite fear, but close. Board members, Victoria said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Thank you for making time on short notice. I know you're all busy. This won't take long. An older woman to Victoria's right spoke first. Victoria, before we begin, I want to say on behalf of the entire board that we understand how difficult this quarter has been, the pressure you're under. If you need to make hard decisions about asset liquidation, we support you. Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate that. Victoria opened her laptop. But I'm not here to discuss liquidation. I'm here to present our quarterly asset valuation, including full restoration status on the Cypress Ridge property. James leaned forward slightly. Victoria, we discussed this. That property is a liability. The foundation damage alone has been fully repaired. Victoria turned her laptop screen toward the board. I'd like to introduce Lucas Hale, the structural engineer who conducted the repairs. Mr. Hale, would you care to present your findings? Lucas stepped forward, setting his report on the table. He'd done presentations before. Building inspections, code compliance reviews, structural assessments for nervous homeowners. But never in a room like this, where every person present probably made in a week what he made in a year. He didn't let it intimidate him. Numbers were numbers, structure was structure. Truth was truth regardless of the room it was spoken in. The Cypress Ridge property experienced foundation damage consistent with deliberate sabotage, Lucas began, his voice steady. Support beams were compromised through targeted excavation around load-bearing piers. Additionally, 2 separate arson attempts were made to destroy the repairs in progress. He saw James's face go carefully neutral. Brenner's remained expressionless. Over 6 days, I reinforced the entire foundation structure. Every compromised beam was replaced with pressure-treated lumber exceeding code specifications. Every foundation pier was reinforced with additional concrete and steel bracing. The result is a structure that now exceeds California building code requirements by a margin of 32%. Lucas distributed copies of his report around the table. This documentation includes engineering calculations, photographic evidence, and my professional certification. The property is not only habitable, it's one of the most structurally sound coastal buildings in Monterey County. Margaret picked up the report, scanning through pages. This is comprehensive, but Mr. Hale, you're saying the damage was deliberate sabotage? Yes, ma'am. And I have video evidence of the most recent attempt, along with testimony from the individual arrested at the scene. Arrested? James's voice was too sharp, too surprised. He caught himself and modulated. I wasn't aware there had been any arrests. Because it happened last night, Victoria said smoothly, while you were, I believe, having dinner with the Hartwell investors. Nice restaurant choice, by the way. How was the wine? The implication hung in the air. James had been out enjoying expensive dinners while someone tried to burn down the property he was supposedly concerned about. Brenner cleared his throat. Victoria, these are serious accusations. If you're suggesting that someone associated with the company, I'm not suggesting anything, David. I'm stating facts. Facts supported by forensic accounting, email records, and financial transactions that trace directly back to several people in this room. Victoria stood and Lucas saw every board member straighten in their chairs. She had their complete attention now. 3 months ago, a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands transferred $2 million to Richard Morse for the purpose of acquiring my mother's property. That holding company has 3 partners. Victoria clicked a button, and the conference room screen lit up with a corporate structure chart. Richard Morse, who needed capital to avoid bankruptcy. David Brenner, my trusted lawyer of 10 years. And James Chen, my business partner and CFO. The room erupted. Multiple board members talking at once, demanding explanations, threatening legal action. James remained seated, but his face had gone pale. Brenner stood, already shifting into defense mode. Victoria, this is absurd. Whatever conspiracy theory you've constructed is supported by your own emails. Victoria clicked again, and email after email filled the screen. Messages between James and Brenner discussing timeline for her mother's death, financial projections based on forced asset sales, instructions to Morse about maintaining plausible deniability. Every damning word, every calculated betrayal, displayed for the entire board to read. You planned this while my mother was dying, Victoria said, her voice steady, but Lucas could hear the fury beneath it. You sat in her hospital room with me, James. You told me to take all the time I needed. And then you went back to your office and calculated how long pancreatic cancer would take to kill her. James stood abruptly. This is taken out of context. Business communications don't what? Don't prove that you conspired with my lawyer to sabotage my company? That you hired arsonists to destroy property I refused to sell? That you threatened a 7-year-old child to intimidate the contractor I hired? Victoria's voice rose for the first time. Which part is out of context, James? Brenner was already moving toward the door. I don't have to listen to this. Victoria, when you're ready to discuss this rationally, have your new lawyer contact mine. Sit down, David. The voice came from the doorway. Lucas turned to see Officer Brennan standing there, along with a woman in a detective's badge and 2 uniformed officers behind them. David Brenner and James Chen, the detective said, stepping into the room. I'm Detective Ramirez. We have warrants for your arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit arson, fraud, and attempted extortion. You have the right to remain silent. The room dissolved into chaos. Board members backing away. James trying to argue while being cuffed. Brenner demanding his phone, his lawyer, his rights. Through it all, Victoria stood at the head of the table, watching the men who'd betrayed her being led away in handcuffs, her expression carved from stone. When the police had taken both men and the conference room doors closed again, silence fell like a weight. Margaret spoke first, her voice shaken. Victoria, I don't know what to say. We had no idea. I know you didn't. That's why they targeted me specifically. They knew I was isolated. distracted by my mother's illness. Vulnerable. Victoria sat back down, suddenly looking exhausted. But I'm not anymore. Another board member, younger, spoke up. What happens to the company now? With our CFO arrested? We promote from within. Elena Rodriguez has been handling most of the actual financial operations for the past year anyway. She'll step into the CFO role pending board approval. Victoria looked around the table. And we continue operating. We survive this. We're stronger than two corrupt executives. And the Cypress Ridge property? Margaret asked. Victoria glanced at Lucas. Fully restored, appraised at $2.4 million, which means instead of being forced to sell at a loss, we now hold a premium asset that gives us negotiating power with our creditors. That's, Margaret consulted her notes, that's $800,000 more than we projected. That changes our entire financial position. I know. Victoria allowed herself a small smile. Turns out keeping promises is good business. The meeting continued for another hour, restructuring plans and emergency protocols and all the corporate machinery that needed to grind forward. Lucas stayed through it, answering technical questions about the property, providing documentation when requested, being the solid foundation Victoria needed in human form. When it finally ended and the board members filed out, some supportive, some skeptical, all clearly shaken, Victoria and Lucas were left alone in the conference room with its floor-to-ceiling windows and its views of a city that didn't care about their small victory. It's done, Victoria said quietly. It's actually done. The arrests are done. The legal battle is just starting. I know. Brenner will hire the best defense attorneys money can buy. James will claim he was manipulated, coerced, anything to reduce his sentence. She turned to face Lucas. But they lost. Today, in this room, they lost. Lucas picked up his report, the pages that had helped save her company. What happens to the property now? I keep it. The board voted to retain it as a company asset, but I'm buying it back personally. Using my own money. I want it in my name. My mother's name. Victoria walked to the windows, looking out at the bay. I'm going to restore the house too. Not just the foundation. Everything. Make it what she wanted it to be. That'll be expensive. I don't care. Some things matter more than money. Lucas joined her at the window, both of them looking out at water and sky and the endless horizon. I should go. I need to get to Sacramento. Bring Emma home. Of course. Your daughter. Victoria turned to him. I never properly thanked you. For everything. For not walking away when anyone sensible would have. I'm not that sensible. No, you're better than that. You're honest. She held out her hand. If you ever need anything, Lucas Hale, anything at all, you call me. Lucas shook her hand, feeling the strength in her grip, the certainty that came from surviving something that should have destroyed her. Keep that foundation maintained, he said. Get it inspected annually. That's a good house. It deserves to last. It will, I promise. They stood there for a moment longer, two people who'd fought a war nobody else saw, who'd kept promises nobody else believed in, who'd proven that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys could win if they were stubborn enough. Then Lucas left, taking the elevator down 32 floors, walking out into San Francisco sunshine that felt warmer than it had any right to be. His phone buzzed as he reached his truck. A text from Marnie. Emma made you another picture. This one has you slaying a dragon. She says you're a hero. Are you? Lucas looked at the message for a long moment. Then he typed back. I'm just a contractor who kept a promise. Tell her I'm on my way. The drive to Sacramento took 3 hours through traffic that tested his patience and his truck's aging transmission. But when he finally pulled up to Marnie's apartment building and saw Emma burst through the door, running toward him with her arms spread wide and her gap-toothed smile bright as sunshine, every exhausted mile was worth it. She hit him like a small missile, wrapping her arms around his waist, talking so fast he couldn't parse the words. Something about the vacation and the drawings and how Aunt Marnie let her stay up late watching movies. Lucas knelt down to her level, holding her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the particular kid smell that meant safety and home and everything he'd been fighting to protect. I missed you, Daddy, she said into his shoulder. I missed you too, Em, so much. Aunt Marnie said you were fighting a dragon. Did you win? Lucas pulled back to look at her. at his daughter who believed in dragons and heroes and fathers who always came home. "Yeah, sweetheart, I won. Can I see the dragon?" It wasn't a real dragon, just some bad people who were trying to hurt someone I was helping, but they can't hurt anyone anymore. Emma processed this with the seriousness only a 7-year-old could muster. "Did you use your hammer?" "I used my hammer, my tools, and my brain. Mostly my brain." "That's good. Brains are important." She grabbed his hand. "Come on, I want to show you all my pictures. I made 17. Marnie stood in the doorway, watching them with an expression that combined relief and something that looked like pride. Lucas mouthed thank you over Emma's head. Marnie nodded, understanding everything that couldn't be said in front of a child. They spent the next hour looking at Emma's drawings, each one a variation on the same theme, Lucas and Emma together, holding hands, smiling. Some had dragons. Some had beaches. Some had unicorns that still looked like dogs with ice cream cones. All of them showed a world where fathers came home and promises were kept, and the sun was always perfect and yellow. On the drive back home, Emma fell asleep in her car seat, one hand still clutching her newest drawing. Lucas drove carefully through the darkening evening, watching the road and occasionally glancing at his daughter in the rearview mirror. His phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. Morse cut a deal. Full testimony against James and Brenner in exchange for reduced charges. It's over. Really over. Lucas typed back one-handed. Good. You earned it. A pause, then another message. The property needs landscaping. I know a 7-year-old who likes beaches. Bring her by sometime. Let her see what her father helped save. Lucas smiled. I will. He drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, past the ocean he'd spent a week fighting beside, toward a house that had never looked more welcoming. When he pulled into the driveway, Emma stirred awake, blinking sleepily. Are we home, Daddy? Yeah, Em. We're home. She smiled, that perfect gap-toothed smile that made everything else fade into background noise. Good. I like being home with you. I like being home with you, too. Inside, the house was exactly as he'd left it, messy and comfortable and full of reminders that he had a life worth fighting for. Emma immediately ran to her room to arrange her drawings, chattering about which one should go on the fridge and which one should go on her wall. Lucas stood in the kitchen, looking at the drawing she'd left on the counter before this whole thing started. Daddy and me at the beach. Both of them smiling. Both of them holding hands. He'd kept that promise. Against arsonists and conspiracies and people who thought money could buy anything, he'd kept his promise to a woman he barely knew because it aligned with the promise he'd made to his daughter. That the world had people in it who kept their word, who fought for what was right, who didn't walk away when things got hard. His phone buzzed one last time. Victoria again. Thank you. For everything. For showing me that some foundations can't be destroyed no matter how hard people try. Lucas looked at the message, then at Emma's drawing, then out the window at the fading light over the ocean. He'd fixed a lot of foundations in his career, replaced beams and reinforced structures and made buildings safe for the people who lived in them. But this week, he'd done something different. He'd shown a woman that she could stand on her own ground, that she didn't need rescuing, just support, just someone willing to make sure the ground beneath her feet wouldn't collapse while she fought her own battles. And maybe that was what foundations were really about. Not just wood and concrete and engineering calculations, but the solid truth that some things, promises, integrity, the commitment to stand beside people when they needed it most, those things couldn't be sabotaged or burned or threatened into submission. Those things lasted. Lucas typed back a final message. Foundations matter. Remember that. Then he put his phone away and went to help Emma hang her drawings, because that was the work that mattered most. Not corporate boardrooms or conspiracy trials or dramatic confrontations with people who'd lost their way. Just a father and daughter, hanging pictures on a wall, building a life that was honest and steady and strong enough to last. The way his own father had taught him to build. The way he was teaching Emma, one yellow sun at a time. Outside, the ocean threw itself against the shore, relentless and honest, wearing down even the strongest rocks through sheer persistence. But some things didn't wear down. Some promises didn't break. And Lucas Hale, contractor, single father, man who fixed things because life had broken enough, had proven that truth could still win battles. One careful foundation at a time.